You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always, and welcome to the new year. It's fantastic to keep this podcast going into 2026. Back in 2018, when our first podcast was going live, I never thought that 2026 we'd be getting close to number 400. Who would have thought? And I thought we'd start the year off looking forward with some strategy and I guess something constructive to talk about with Andrew Lefort, Director of Planning and Development, one of my favourite planners in WA on the government side, certainly one of the ones I respect the most, along with Ross Manette and Amanda Shears. These are real trailblazers, in my opinion, of great culture and great skill and competency on the government side in planning, to talk about the updated local planning scheme in the City of Gosnells and also culture and how we improve that in the planning space in WA. Andrew, thanks so much for coming in, mate.
Thanks, Trent. Thanks for having me.
And Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
I wanted to start this conversation, if we can, like we do with a lot of experts in their field, talking about how you got from young planner, probably at uni, to top of the pops in the planning space at your local government. It's not easy to look forward and just imagine going from graduate planner to director. What was your journey? Where'd you start?
I actually graduated from Curtin Business School with a Bachelor of Commerce. That was the path that I took originally. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do and thought Bachelor of Commerce was a good general degree which would give me some good basis. So I wasn't really in the planning space. Graduated, worked for a little bit in that commercial space, and then did the whole travelling, go to London, Europe and all that sort of stuff. And I guess it was when I was there I was thinking, what do I really want to do? What journey do I really want to go on? And I really wanted to have a career that was focused on places and property and all those sort of things. So it all came together with a bit of an idea of, okay, I think planning is the way that I want to go. So got back to settle down after all that travelling and was like, okay, how do I approach this? And then started the Master of Urban and Regional Planning course at Curtin and undertook my degree from there.
That makes a lot of sense because of most of the planners in Perth, you are one that definitely seems to understand the commercial side and the commercial prerogative. It's something that comes with a lot of risk being a developer and trying to change places and improve places. And I've always found you personally as someone on the government side who understood that risk and understood how hard we work on our side. And it makes sense now to know that you actually started with a commercial background because it sets you apart from most planners who went straight into planning and have always been on the planning side, never really dipped their toes into the commercial side.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I first was looking into it and I thought, I've got a Bachelor of Commerce, how does that marry up with planning? And I wasn't really sure how it linked. And I thought, and I was actually happy that I could do the master degree. But once I started getting into planning and working in the field, I really could see how that Bachelor of Commerce was so important and understanding those fundamentals of economics and accounting and all those other things you do when you're at Curtin.
Have you noticed, not to big note yourself, you're a humble guy, but have you noticed that there are a lot of planners, especially on the government side, who may not have ever been in the private sector, who sometimes don't click with just how hard it is to make these things work in the first place when they're being assessed?
Definitely. Having that commercial understanding and understanding feasibility and all those sorts of things, it is critical. And you learn that through your journey. I think when you start in planning, you're dealing with lower end things or something that's more simple. But as you progress through and you start dealing with more complex applications, you start dealing with developers all the time, you start to really understand those economics fundamentals. It's so critical and you do develop. And then when you're looking at your strategic planning, you really need to have that in mind as well. UDIA run a course that's for anyone in the development industry, and particularly I think it was targeted at local government. I did it many years ago, and it was understanding those critical elements. Having worked in local government, I didn't really understand feasibility of how things all stack up and all the things that go into it. So doing that course was really beneficial to me in my career and something that I would recommend other local government planners do as well.
Great shout out. And I think it nearly needs to be mandatory, in my opinion, that all local planners at every level actually go and take the time to understand what it takes to put an application together that they are assessing.
Yeah.
So they can respect it in a way, to be honest, because it really isn't sometimes, I think, understood just how much work and money and time and risk is put into, and love. Like, that actually takes a lot of passion to go and take all those risks as well. And so I think, the more that we can both come from a similar background of understanding what we're trying to achieve, I think it makes it easier, therefore, to get to a situation where we're both trying to find a pathway towards approval rather than being gatekeeper of approvals, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. It is about, facilitating that development. Good development. We want to facilitate good development. That's what the community expects, and that's our job. But it's not about saying these are the rules and we're just going to sit here until you agree to the rules that we provide. That's just not going to get you anywhere and just going to cause issues. So it's about, okay, here's the framework that we've got, understanding what you as the developer is trying to achieve. We're all trying to achieve good development. May have look different, slightly different to us, but we're trying to achieve good development. So it's a bit of a cliche, but it is about that outcome, that it's not about whether you comply with rule A, B or C. It is about what is the actual outcome we want with development.
As well. Yeah. I think a great opportunity there is that the second someone on the development side lodges with the local government, that planning officer becomes part of the team rather than the police officer in a way. Like when we've lodged it and you're our assessing officer, you actually become part of a team from a cultural perspective to go, hey, how do we get this approved? You're nearly our building surveyor going, hey, look, you haven't got it yet, but do this and this is where you need to be. That culture, I think, would be so much more productive for supply, especially, and good supply, than the gatekeeper of, no, you haven't met the outcomes we need. What do you suggest? Oh, I can't tell you that.
Yeah.
It's, Jesus Christ, man. And we see a lot of that, not from a team that you run, and certainly not from you personally, Andrew. You've got yourself your Master of Planning. What was the next step at that point?
It was early 2000s, and getting planning work was a pretty good time to be in the field. I actually started my first role while I was still at uni, towards finishing that off at the City of Gosnells. I was involved in subdivisions and subdivision clearances, which was a really good entry into understanding how the subdivision process works and dealing with various different, from a 2-lot subdivision to coordinating hundreds of lots when that clearance process and how it's all implemented. That was my first role and I loved it. It was really great. I loved the culture, and working at City of Gosnells back in the day was a really good entry point. I had a couple of different roles from there before I wanted some private experience. Ended up going and working in private planning consultancy just for a little bit, not too long, but I did it for a bit just because I wanted to have that experience and understand what it was like from that side of things. Worked in that for a little bit before returning back to local government in a planning role, which I've been in ever since. 12 years at City of Coburn. Coburn was probably where I had a lot of experience in dealing with some really great developments, the likes of Coburn Central Town Centre, Port Coogee Marina. There were some really good, exciting developments that I was so fortunate to be involved in. And just touching on what you were saying before with feeling like you're part of the development team, one of the developments I remember with Stockland, they did it really well in that I think it was Kalia in Treeby, which was the first development down there. And they had a development team and we were invited as sort of part of that development team, which would meet on a regular basis throughout the entire project from nothing to the completed estate that it is now. So that was a really good experience and probably one of the first time I'd been involved in that sort of capacity where it was just regular meetings, like we were part of the sort of project team and nutting out any issues along the way, making sure we had that, not just the planners there, we had the engineers there, we had everyone who was making decisions from the planning point of view in local government was involved in those discussions. And that was just such a smooth process and with some really good outcomes. I think if you go there now, I think it's done really well from the city's point of view, from the developer's point of view. I know now it's extended on beyond Treeby, which was after I left, but I think that was a really good example of working together and really having an opportunity. Like we had our say in what we thought was good and what we could live with, and them challenging us or us challenging them, whatever, but it worked out really well.
Have you noticed across the 3 local governments you've worked at, Gosnells, Coburn and Stirling, differences in culture, differences in approach to progress, to the requirement to pull together to fix this housing crisis from a supply side? Can you explain the intangibles in that space?
Yeah, I have been really lucky in all 3 local governments I've worked in because I was deliberate about where I wanted to work and fortunate enough to be able to wait for the right role in the right local government. So I'm not someone who would just go and work anywhere. I'm quite specific and I've been so lucky. I wanted to work at Stirling and the role came up and it was really good. So I have been fortunate enough that all 3 local governments have been quite customer focused, which is really key, with cultures that want to assist and want to achieve good planning outcomes. Stirling, as most people know, years ago, it was just, from what
tough.
I'd heard, it was tough. People found it difficult to develop in. But now, with the leadership that we've got through Amanda in development services, that has turned around. The culture has totally shifted, and now it is really somewhere where they are facilitating development. They are looking to how they can assist in getting more housing. So I think culturally, yeah, it is all about the culture, having the right people in the right positions, particularly at the leadership level.
The fish rots from the head. And if you've got leadership either at the director level or even the manager level, and even more pertinently at the council level, that are moving in the opposite direction, it can be a real cancer. And even those young, sprightly grads who are looking to make a difference, they can easily be worn down pretty quickly by some bad culture and bad leadership. And I've seen it many times in a number of councils where it has oscillated over the years. There are some councils where you go out to a great city to work with as a developer, and then the councillors change, the director changes, and it now becomes one of the hardest places to do business. It becomes NIMBY. Right, I would have said historically Gosnells was a fairly clunky place to work with. Maybe not anti-development, but just tough to appease in a lot of ways, especially around the engineering side, because there are flood risks and things like that in Gosnells. And certainly since you've come on, culture has changed to being, how can we get an outcome? How do we actually move forward and work together on this, which I think is a big reflection of your time that you've also spent with Amanda and Steb at Sterling. It's clear that things have changed as the leadership changes in some of these places. And I'm hoping that continues to permeate around Perth, of get on board, let's be a team. The second we get an application, let's join that developers project team to get somewhere.
I think as well, in this context with the housing crisis, it is all about supply. What are we doing to increase supply? How can we make our planning framework work so that we get the housing supply that we all need? So I think in that context, everyone is affected by the lack of housing, whether it's their kids or someone they know or themselves who are trying to crack into the housing market. Everyone recognises we need to do something. So I feel there is a bit of a shift, and hopefully that'll permeate through a lot of local governments, that we do need to make this happen, because otherwise we're going to...
Do you think it has permeated through? Do you think when you speak to your colleagues across the industry, not just within Gosnells or Sterling or Coburn that you've worked in, you obviously have networks socially across these councils. Is there a stark difference between some councils where privately, maybe not on this podcast, but you could speak to your colleague and go, yeah, those guys, they're not interested at all? Can you honestly say that exists? Or can you say, no, I think everyone's trying, but for whatever reason, whether it's council culture, whether it's just lack of opportunity, whether it's rigid schemes, whether it's fear, like, where does it sit? Why don't we have a consensus amongst the development industry that all local governments are very fantastic to work with and all want to be part of? Why is that not the consensus?
Yeah, I think from a planning point of view, I can honestly say most people that I know are on the same page. We want good planning outcomes and good development, well-designed development, and not at any expense. I think taking a flexible and pragmatic approach is what most people I've spoke to. I think obviously in some of those, probably some of perhaps Western Suburbs councils, where you've got those particularly communities who are... they don't want things to happen, or everything they do, it's hard, it's tough, and it's tough to do those things. And the easy way is obviously not to do them, but making those tough decisions, I can see how if I worked in one of those, that it would be really difficult.
Yeah, it's easier to do nothing or to delay than to actually make change and make decisions, because at least you can't get judged for delay.
Absolutely.
In the same way.
Yeah. So I think some of those communities, they really are hard, the planners, to deal with.
So it's a reflection possibly on the constituents who vote for the councillors, who then put pressure on the city officers themselves.
I think it absolutely.
And that leads me to another question. You may not be able to answer this, but I think there's also a view around the industry that cities hire professionals like yourself for a reason. You're highly skilled. Most of your colleagues are highly skilled and competent at what they do. Whether they have a great culture or not is a different perspective, but they clearly know what they're doing. And we often see in the industry that being hamstrung by poor council culture of creating fear amongst city officers who are literally scared for their job or for promotion if they go and do the right thing, in my opinion, because they feel like they're going to get backlash. You're going to have to get ripped in front of the council and answering questions about stuff that most councils would be absolutely fine with, and the state government certainly is screaming for when it comes to help on housing supply and flexibility and pragmatism around that too. I can see there being value, certainly, in council having input into the forward-thinking strategy of what the council looks like, the LGA looks like from a strategy point of view. But why do we have councillors who are, for the most part, not in any way experts in your field? There may be lawyers, doctors, nurses, just regular other jobs, having input into the assessment and statutory outcomes of applications that you've just been paid to assess yourself. Why do they get a say? And is it even helpful?
Look, I think that if you've got a really good relationship between the council and the administration and you've built trust, and I know that's definitely the case at the City of Gosnells, there is a really good level of trust from the councillors, and they understand that they don't have the technical answer, but if they're provided with the information in a really well-written format, that's written not in a technical jargon, but it's fairly straightforward, I think that's where councillors, they do have that trust that the planning area or whoever they're determining applications from actually do know what they're saying, and they have trust that they're going to have the correct planning outcomes.
The question comes down to, should councillors have the right to provide recommendations from assessments when they clearly have only looked at it for half an hour and they don't have the competencies to actually make proper assessments in the first place? What is the value of that?
Yeah, I think council shouldn't be assessing the proposals. A good assessment should be done by the planning team, and a good recommendation should be provided to the council. There should be an opportunity for either a workshop or briefing sessions and things like that answer all those questions and go through those things. But we're not asking council to do an assessment. We're asking them to trust the recommendation of the planning staff, which will lead to the best planning outcome. So I think it's, what do we want out of council? We want them to look at things from a strategic point of view. We don't want council getting involved in your extension of a single house, and that's obviously already legislated that you can't send up those sort of to council. But absolutely.
And pragmatic from a state level. I just think I see it too often these days where highly competent planning teams, City of Swan's a great example, where at the moment recommendations being made by the city officers, director level, for amendments of schemes, for planning applications, and then the council at Swan, who are highly politically motivated these days, being at odds with that, recommending the opposite, a refusal, and then WAPC having to essentially set that aside and go, these guys are mental. We actually trust the professionals. And it makes me go, what's the point of it then? And you see the same thing in other councils, especially in the western suburbs. We've seen it a number of times recently where the councillors, highly politicised, are at odds with the professional recommendations of the staff. And then that creates fear. Maybe we should second guess ourselves next time when we put our recommendation in. If the council is not happy with it, maybe I won't get promoted next time. What is the value of that? I don't think that is helpful in any way, especially to what is a wartime crisis we have right now on housing supply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that some councillors, particularly, it could be newer councillors who have come on board, and this isn't at Gosnells, but just in general, that may not understand that bigger picture. So councils that have been working together predominantly for many years, and Gosnells is one of them, where the councils work really well. They understand those issues. They don't pretend to try and be technical experts. That's not what they're there for. But they're there to consider the strategic context of the city and how the city is going to grow from a strategic point of view.
And I think that's where it should stay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Strategy. Guys, this is what we want. We want apartments here. We want low density here. We want medium density here. We're thinking about putting some commercial here. Go away and do the work. Yeah, cool. We think that's great. Bang. From that point on, developers have their rule book. They go and create their applications, and then the professionals assess them.
That's right.
From my perspective, at no point after that should councils have input. But again, that's something that is slowly being ebbed away right now by the state level, and I think for good outcomes. It's creating some level of red tape cutting that existed for a very long time and got in the way. Let's make a pivot, if we can, talking about the state government, to John Kerry's train station plan, transit-oriented development side of things. That seems to be something that I remember about 10 years ago being in the Alana McTiernan times, and I assumed that it actually in somewhat taken effect years ago. Clearly it hadn't, and we come back to this now. It's a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that many local governments do actually have good planning frameworks around those stations. They've done it off their own back, and the reason why they're not developing may not be because of reasons to do with political or whatever. It may just be that it's not feasible.
It's money.
Yeah, it's not feasible. So I think when it's not feasible, I don't think taking the decision-making and the planning work away from local government and putting to state is going to achieve a huge amount. I think where there are areas where the planning framework is not up to scratch or it hasn't been updated, or there's really strong community opposition and it's political, I can see the reason why you would take that planning away from the local government and put it in the state government. But so many local governments have done the planning work. We've got land that's ready to go. It's just not feasible. So I don't see how taking away that approval framework or the planning framework away from the government is going to really achieve huge amounts, but certainly in some areas.
Was Gosnells left off for any reason? Do you think just because you guys already had it sorted?
I think so. Yeah, it was already, there were already development opportunities. So I think if they were feasible to develop now, they would. And it's not for the reason that the planning framework hasn't been done.
It looks like it to me when I look at Kerry's plan that he's targeted areas where there probably should be density and there currently isn't in the local plan. Yeah. Why fix it if it ain't broke?
Yeah.
And also, though, the question has to be asked, as the Director of Planning in the City of Gosnells, it's been a city that's been moving a lot the last few years, especially on house prices, and that obviously speaks to accessibility, mobility, affordability. Does Gosnells need higher density?
I think.
Are you planning for it? Have you planned for it in your recent scheme?
Yes, we have. So one of the key elements of Local Planning Scheme 24 was to make sure we had good density around our rail stations and activity centres. But a lot of that was actually there previously. So it's not like we've gone from having no density and just all low density R20 to suddenly having opportunities for apartments with R80 and above. That actually was there before. And there's key sites. For example, there's some key sites by the state government next to Maddington Central Shopping Centre that have been available to develop for years. They're just not feasible.
Yeah, it just doesn't stack up at the price points in
Yeah,
Gosnells, let alone most other parts of Perth.
Exactly. And the other thing that I have found in a few different examples in the past is local governments putting on some really ambitious densities, perhaps too high, and that artificially inflating the value of the land from the owner's point of view.
And then it sterilises.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
Like City, in sort of Cannington, east of the train line there, around Queen's Park, Wharf Street, these sort of areas, zone maybe a little bit too high and the land just sits there.
And then the owner has an expectation that, wow, I've got R160 or whatever it is, I can have a tower on my property, and yet it's just not feasible. So then they might have paid a huge amount, or it might have been on sold then to someone else who's thought that was possible. And so that can actually really slow things down as well. So I think not only having the right density codes is so important, not just saying go for it and have the highest possible. You got to have the right, it's got to be at the right point.
Yeah, that balance of meeting, as you said, strategic goals, but also feasibility fundamentally comes down to it. You can have strategic goals, and if the developer or the whole market can't make it stack up, there's no point having it at R160. However, the counter argument to that is at some point we want apartments here. If we go and allow people to put two-story townhouses here, we'll never see apartments here.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing to balance as a local government planner, isn't it?
It is, and I think that's where you really got to be strategic and go, okay, realistically, is this ever going to be all towers? Maybe not, but maybe that's where we want the tower, and that's where we're going to have the terraces, and that's where we're going to have the other densities. So it's really about getting the right mix in the right locations, because we just simply, in many locations, you're just not going to get towers in the whole area if you're not in the CBD. And even in 20, 30 years' time, it's probably not going to happen. So really getting those densities right from a strategic point of view is critical, and making sure that there's obviously that level of amenity as well, which is always the case. So it's all well and good to have some really high density coatings, but really, is anyone going to want to live there? What else is around there?
With local developers, when you're making those density choices and say, hey, top 5 developers in Gosnells over the last 5 to 10 years, what do you reckon? Do you have those chats?
I don't think it happened with the previous iteration of the scheme. That's the current version.
Wouldn't that be valuable?
Definitely. I think as
part often it happens in silos, I think.
Yeah, and I think with new local planning schemes, there's an advertising and consultation process that's basically out there, but it might not necessarily be targeted. So it's out there, it's on the website or whatever, and then, but are those targeted conversations being had?
I think the targeted ones need to be had. And I think you go to advertising because you have to. You hear from Nancy about, I don't want R40 here, no worries. I don't want a school here, no worries. That's fine.
Yep.
But if you're being really strategic and proactive about it, I've seen the City of Stirling do it really well, where they've actually gone out and said, hey, top 5 developers in our area, we're thinking of doing this. Do you think this will work before we suggest it?
Definitely. And we did that at Stirling with the new scheme, which I had some involvement in, just fortunately being during that time. And when we went out for advertising, we did make sure that all the planning consultants who represent all the large landowners were aware of it. And there was a lot of meetings that we had where people were coming in with clients or on behalf of their clients, and they were aware of it. And that was a really important thing to make sure we did communicate with all those planning consultants and big developers, because all the big developers were generally represented by those main planning consultants.
What has LPS 24 done to the City of Gosnells planning strategy that TPS 6 didn't? What can I do now as a developer if you give us a really back of the envelope rundown of, hey guys, if you do this stuff, we're open for business?
Yeah, as I said, there were a lot of opportunities previously. So what LPS 24 has done, I think, firstly, is simplify the planning framework a little bit. So made it a little bit easier to navigate through the framework, which it was an old 2002 scheme. It had a lot of amendments, but wasn't exactly up to date. So I think just simplifying the framework is a huge plus, and that's for developers and for people using the scheme who are assessing against it. That was the key thing. Obviously, making sure we had the right densities around our train stations. So fortunate enough to have 4 Beckenham, Kenwick, Maddington and Gosnells as our main train stations. So making sure we did have the right densities. As I said, a lot of them were there before, but just making sure that they were correct and also were the right size, as in like the areas around those rail stations. Other things like removing split codings. Often there was a split code where it might have been like a R60, R80 or R40, whatever, and it was like you could achieve the high density if you did this and this, but really looking at that going, well, if we're happy with that high density, let's just make it that high density. Like, why are we... Yeah, and it needs to be good development and achieve those things anyway. Yeah. Like, having a requirement to say you've got to achieve good design,
it's
whatever.
It's a bit clunky, isn't it? Local governments moving away from that.
You think the Commission as well, they don't support it. I think that was a good step. We also increased the base code density in some of the lower density areas. So it was previously R17.5, which is very low, to an R20 base, which is obviously, it provided some opportunity, but it wasn't the main point of it. It was just really to try and make that a little bit more contemporary. Normalising some structure plan areas, so areas that previously, like in Canning Vale, that had a structure plan over it, obviously now being just coded under the scheme. So a little bit of fix up. So I don't think LPS 24 was a groundbreaking, we're going to massively change all these densities, because we already had a lot of them. We already had a lot of opportunities around centres. So it's really just about making it easier to use, more flexible, so that we can actually remove a bit of red tape and get the development that we need.
From your perspective, do you sit back and go, we've got the right amount of development happening in Gosnells right now? Or do you say, guys, we're open for business? I'm on here to say, come at us. We want it. We want more applications.
Absolutely. Yeah, we don't have enough, I don't think. Although the planning team, they've got enough. They've got a lot of applications, but we have more opportunities. And I understand a lot of it is a feasibility issue. I understand that if people could develop a whole swathe of apartments, they would. But a lot of it is feasibility, which some of it we're trying to do what we can to make sure. We're looking at our policy framework. We've recently advertised our change, something simple like our public art local planning policy, where we have said, look, we don't want to impose extra costs on residential development at this point in time. Why are we... This is another extra cost. It may not be the breaking point of whether a development's going to go ahead or not.
It's 1,000 cuts.
It's that whole 1,000 cuts thing. So it's like, okay, that's something that we can easily do. It's not going to make a big difference. We're still going to get art in our commercial precincts in the key areas. That's fine. Let's just make another cost sort of
It's
remove.
a tax, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And when you're doing... and I've paid public art in the tens of thousands of dollars to the City of Gosnells for land developments that I've done. And I do sit there and just suck it up, because you go, what art are you doing with this in this 30-lot subdivision in Canning Vale? It's a tax. Just be honest. It's a tax. It's going to the general fund. And at some point, you may use it on art somewhere else, totally irrelevant to where I am. So I think it's so pragmatic for you guys to actually go, yeah, all we're doing right now is passing cost on to first home buyers. How about we remove that, because it's not necessary to run a government?
Yeah, and we've recognised that having good public art is great to have in the community. It should be, if someone wants to put art, like if obviously it's either a contribution or art as part of the building, but where we want it as part of the building, it would be in town centre locations and things like that. I think that was just an easy one, and the council were really happy with to go so far. It's being advertised at the moment, and council still have to make a final decision. Generally, it is a bit of a no-brainer.
That's great culture, though.
Yeah.
Isn't it? It's people actually being pragmatic and going, at this point in time, this is not the priority. Yeah. Priority is getting the lowest cost supply of housing into our LGA.
It is. And another thing we're looking at the moment and we're advertising is obviously with public open space, we're making sure our policy is the case that if public open space contributions have already been paid in infill areas, that obviously we're not trying to take more contributions. And also we've advertised to increase the threshold from 3 lots to 6.
Great.
So
that's fantastic, Andrew. We've been asking for that for years.
Yeah, and obviously where it hasn't been seeded in the past, we still need public open space in those areas, so they will still get a contribution. In some areas we have, say, for example, in Kenwick, with large 2,000-3,000 square metre lots that have never been subdivided into smaller suburban. So they will still have a public open space requirement because those residents are still going to need public open space.
You're not double dipping is what you're saying.
We're not double dipping. And we think that once you get to 6 lots or more, that's where I guess it's more likely to be able to stack up. But for those small lot developments, we don't want that public open space contribution. Plus, I think when you're collecting public open space contribution, you really need to look with those contributions, are we going out and buying land for public open space? Are we removing dwellings to put public space? No. So and then you can only have so much we don't need to gold plate every park. So I think it's making sure.
In charge of so many other councils, Andrew. And this is the same conversation that I've had with Canning, for example. And I was literally saying, are you actually saying you're going to go buy land for housing out of St. James, out of Bentley, out of East Vic Park, and make it a park instead of a house with this money? Is that actually what you're going to do? No? Then why are you taking money off 4-lot subdivisions? What is that achieving?
Yeah, and I think where councils do have a public open space strategy, which is really important, and the City of Gosnells actually did look at, okay, these are some critical sites that we would like to have. There might have been a small part where we would like to get another lot to complete that public open space. That's fine, and that's a strategy. But really, the funds that we need for that, we need to make sure that you're not taking funds where you don't have enough. So you want to make sure that what you're collecting for is right for what you're
there's some probity about it.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I think that's really important. And it's quite complex and difficult to look at that and how that's all happened. The other thing with public open space and public open space strategies is a lot of them are looked at as to how much public open space you've got in the area that was seeded under the Planning and Development Act. But we're also looking at what other public open space we have that might not have been land seeded, but it might be land, for example, that the local government has in freehold. So it's still used as public open space for the residents. They've still got this access to public open space, but technically it might not contribute to the 10%. It might not contribute to that 10%. But we're still looking at that going, okay, there's one figure here of your actual public open space. There's one that's obviously the technical requirement. So just making sure that's taken into account.
Honestly, this has to be one of the most refreshing chats I've had with a local government planner for a long time. These are the conversations we've been trying to have as an industry with LGA directors who are either empowered, not empowered, interested, not interested, and inconsistently getting outcomes or not getting outcomes with regards to these very important things that most don't understand how critical they are to the 1% on the supply side. It's so pragmatic to hear you talk about this is designated POS, that's designated Parks and Rec. They're used for the same thing. What's the difference? The local council, the local constituents don't know the difference, but why are we still getting slugged on these percentages when at the end of the day, it's just adding to the general revenue funds of the local government to maybe or maybe not buy a new swing?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of doing the work and projecting and going, if we were to collect public open space for all our development sites and just say you had an area or a suburb, you even did it on a suburb base and looked at, okay, if we were to collect public open space and this was to develop at an average density of whatever it is, what funds would we have if we were to get contributions for all that? And that pool of funds, is that actually the right amount of money that we need? Is it way over? Is it under? Whatever. But doing that work is critical. And say something from inner city, suburb or whatever, they don't have any land left to purchase.
Therefore, it just becomes another art contribution tax.
Yeah.
It's we can take 10%, so we will.
Yeah.
And that's a tax. That's not actually a contribution because we're not contributing to anything.
So
you're not going to be doing anything with it. So we're not actually achieving anything out of this. You're just getting money from me as a tax.
But that's balanced with, I guess, with areas like I mentioned, say, some areas in Kenwick or other areas where they've never been subdivided for urban purposes in the past. And if we're getting a new community in that area, although it's infill, it's a bit like greenfield, they actually are going to need some public open space.
So that's where you make a contribution.
That's where we do need the contribution, because we actually will need to be buying or having a plan, a structure plan that has the public open space, which needs to be a shared cost with all the developers.
Yeah,
so
it falls into a DCP style arrangement.
True. Yeah, if a DCP or whatever else you can do, if it's not a DCP, that's okay as well. But if we can do it through some mechanism where we're still getting, because those communities, those new communities are still going to need public open space. So we're not getting away from that. We're just looking at those infill opportunities and going, well,
it was already contributed 45 years ago, mate.
Yeah. So
why are we doing it again? Because I'm turning this 700 square metre lot into 3 or 4 or whatever it is.
Or apartments.
Certainly apartments. The whole point of apartments is you're sharing the same amenity as is already in situ. That is the benefit of infill. Yeah,
and if there's some upgrades that are needed, so be it. But
that's what rates are for.
That's what I'm going to say. So if you do the calculations and you look at when we get these apartments, what's the rate-based increase, that's going to be able to fund some of that stuff. So if you look at it that way, I don't think that the community is going to be worse off, but what the community will be better off is if we get more dwellings and we increase that supply. So that's the main
Maybe you should be the next Director General of the Department of Planning, Andrew, because again, the fish rots from their head. If a culture starts at the top, if you've got this sort of pragmatic culture at the top, then imagine what happens when that permeates down all the way through governments at a state and local level. You actually start seeing pragmatic and proactive decisioning that makes good change.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
Thank
mate. You honestly are one of the very few that I look up to on the government side that are really pragmatic and trying to make a positive difference and recognise just how knackered this state is right now with its problems. It is wartime, chaos and crisis, and we need to do something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we want to be part of, I think in local government, we have to be part of the solution. So what we can do to try and increase opportunities for housing supply is just so critical, and we've got such a good opportunity to be able to do that. I know we can't do everything, particularly with areas with lower land values. We can't make an apartment be worth X amount when you can go and buy a smaller dwelling or a block of land for a lot cheaper. Understand those issues.
You can't build it, but you can set the groundwork for someone to do that and take it out.
And my point of view is we don't want to be the one that's getting in the way of it. If there's a reason why that's not building, or we've issued approval for this development over here and it hasn't happened, which is so common in the past few years, there's development approvals that haven't been realised. I don't want local government or something that's in our remit or our framework to have been the reason why it's not going ahead. If it's not going ahead for other reasons, so be it, and hopefully that will change in the future, but it's not something because of a requirement that we had or something unreasonable. If it's something reasonable, then of course, but if it's something that we could have changed or it's not really going to make a difference, that's kind of what we need to look at.
Andrew Lefort, Director of Planning and Development at the City of Gosnells, thanks so much for this refreshing chat as our first one for 2026. Hopefully it foreshadows a proactive 2026 of moving the dial on our supplier numbers and just the red tape that we generally as developers and investors have to deal with on a daily basis. So let's see what we can do as a team going forward.
Thanks for having me, Trent.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!